Good evening. Wow. Well, welcome to the last Leading Voices in Public Health lecture for 2011. We'll have more in 2012, hopefully. This is also the 28th annual Lamb Lecture, named for John Lamb, who was the first dean of the School of Health and what became the College of Public and Allied Health. In keeping with the tradition of the Lamb Lecture, the speaker will be introduced by the president of the Public Health Student Association. So after a short video, Manny Gonzalez, who's our fresh undergraduate president of PHSA, will come forward and introduce the speaker.
Hello. As Dean Wyko said, my name is Manuel Gonzalez. The College of Public Health, along with the Public Health Student Association, would like to welcome a very special guest at this year's John P. Lamb Memorial Lecture event. Mr. Stan Brock is not only seen as the founder of Remote Area Medical, but also as a hope for many individuals searching for healthcare. It's been mentioned before that Mr. Brock is almost like a fictional character pulled from a book, where there's a new adventure at the turn of every page. However, I assure you that he is real and that he's with us today. I'd like to read a quote that Mr. Brock gave at a commencement speech at the University of Buffalo. Life is a series of opportunities, and the trick is to select the right opportunity and go for it. Ladies and gentlemen, we're in for a treat, so please sit back, relax, and enjoy the trip from Wapishana to Wise. Let's give a warm welcome to Mr. Stan Brock.
Thank you. Is this microphone working? Can you hear me okay in the back? Good. We're sorry, the first 10, 15 seconds of the video were cut out, I think, which is where a number of our more adventurous volunteers parachute out of our historic C-47 aircraft that was originally at the Normandy invasion, June the 6th, 1944. One of 800 C-47s that flew over to Normandy at D-Day, and we have that airplane. And the first 10 seconds of the video that you just saw, which was cut out, I guess, for some reason mechanically, was our volunteers parachuting out of that airplane to a place called Maydor, Haiti, high in the mountains of north central Haiti, and where we made an airstrip. And, you know, I'd like to recognize a couple of our volunteers, and if there are any others in the audience that I've missed because I haven't seen you, please wave at me. There's one there waving at me. Hello. We've got Dr. Wayne here, Wayne Smith, anesthesiologist, and Tommy Pennington next to him. And Tammy Sheldon is somewhere, oh, there she is, number 2 row there. And these folks have been on lots and lots of RAM expeditions, and we've had actually over 68,000 volunteers in the last, let's see, 27 years. And we're very, very proud of them. Can't do it without them. So Remote Area Medical, which is headquartered in Knoxville, Tennessee, just down the road from here, has become the largest provider of free medical care for the have-nots in the United States. And so we're right around 500,000 patients now. And most of them actually are in this country. Yeah, we still have the programs overseas in places like Haiti, in Guyana, India, sometimes in Africa, Guatemala, Honduras, the Dominican Republic, but the bulk of our work is here in the United States. So I have to go way back before most of you were born. What was it, 1950, I think it was. My father had a job with the British government in what was the only British colony on the continent of South America, a little place called British Guiana. And British Guiana is bordered on one side by Venezuela and on the other side by what used to be Dutch Guyana, now Suriname, and to the south by Brazil. And so I was on holiday one summer from school in England, and the British government gave me a ticket to go out and visit my father, who had a short-term assignment on the coast of British Guiana with the government. And it was quite a long voyage in those days. It stopped at various and sundry islands on the way. But during the course of the voyage, I heard about this place on the Brazil border called the Rupununi. And the Rupununi was an area that was inhabited by Amerindian tribes, notably the Wapishanas. And it was also inhabited by many, many thousands of wild longhorn cattle that had been left there hundreds of years before by the Spanish conquistadors, and they were just sort of growing wild there. And they were indeed wild beasts with horns, huge horns out to here, and several thousand horses. They were just running wild over about 10,000 square miles. And I heard about this on the boat from England, and it conjured up in me thoughts of sounding a whole lot better than going back to England and going back to school. And so after we docked in Georgetown, I started to figure out a way to go up to the Rupununi. And to cut a long story short, I eventually found a way to get there. And so here was this young kid in his teens in a land where he couldn't speak the language, which was Wapishana, knew nothing at all about wild horses and wild cattle, and a lot less, of course, about other things that inhabited the region, such as those giant snakes that you've probably heard about, anacondas, and jaguars and pumas and harpy eagles, the world's largest bird of prey. And so this was just a marvelous place for somebody of my age at the time. And so I decided that I was going to stay there and not go back to school. And I became a cowboy, or a vaquero, as they were called there, where all the cowboys were Indians, except me. And they gave me a horse to ride, a horse called Butterball. Butterball was a horse that nobody else wanted to ride. Butterball was old, I was very young. And Butterball got his name from his color. It was sort of a yellowish color. Buckskin, I think is the correct term. And so I was given Butterball because none of the other cowboys, who were all Indians, wanted to ride Butterball. And so Butterball and I sort of plodded along, following the other cowboys on the various roundups. And there were many times when I fell off Butterball because Butterball decided to go this way, and I wasn't ready for it, and I went that way. And so it was all a very interesting learning experience. And then you had to learn how to make your own saddle. And the saddles were made from the skins of deer and the skins of wild bulls, wild cattle. And so each cowboy, we used to kill, unfortunately, one of these animals, because I'm very much against killing animals. We used to kill one of these animals every day. It's amazing how much Indian cowboys can eat. And so every day we would kill a steer and take off the hide and dry the hide. Well, then the hide, you see, would become part of the saddle. And the hide would become the lasso. We used to plait 4 strands of plaited rawhide into a 100-foot lasso, which is what we used, of course, to lasso these wild animals. And so many, many months went by, and I was starting to get the hang of it. I could speak Wapishana now, and Butterball had taught me a lot of things about chasing cattle and that sort of stuff. And so the foreman of the ranch, an older Wapishana gentleman, and by the way, all the cowboys who were Indians were all barefooted, so we did not have any shoes or boots. We rode barefoot. And we had spurs that we manufactured ourselves by taking a piece of wrought iron and hammering it into shape in the fire, and then strapping it with a leather thong on our bare feet, you know, to sort of goose the horse to get a little more speed out of it. So they decided that they were going to give me a horse called Kang. Now, Kang is a word in Wapishana that means the devil. And Kang had already killed 2 other cowboys. And so I was very apprehensive when I heard that I was next. And so we lassoed Kang in the corral and tied him up to a tree and put on the rudimentary saddle and blindfolded him. And then I climbed on board, and they cut him loose. And Kang went bucking across the savannah, and I'm holding on for grim life, and he had a head-on collision with the side of the corral, and I was very badly injured underneath Kang. And this reminds me of a story much more recent that I need to hook all this together for you. I was in Arizona just about a year ago, and I was the guest of the 6th man to walk on the moon, astronaut Ed Mitchell. And Ed Mitchell said, what made you start remote area medical? And so I told him this story that I've just recounted to you, and I got up to the part where Kang had the collision with the corral, and I was very badly injured underneath the horse. And the cowboys came running over, and they pulled me out from underneath Kang, and one of them said, well, the nearest doctor is 26 days on foot from here through the rainforest. It was about that time that I came to the conclusion that we needed to bring those doctors a little bit closer. And when I told that story to the 6th man to walk on the moon, he said, gosh, he said, I was on the moon and I was only 3 days from the nearest doctor. And I said, Captain Mitchell, Ed, for those people who live and still live today in that part of the Amazon, and indeed many, many people who live right here in America, they might as well be on the moon for the opportunity that they have to receive the care that they need. So the story then of remote area medical goes back, and really I have a lot to thank that horse Kang that darn near killed me for getting the idea that remote area medical might one day be able to help some of these people that don't have access to care. Well, the problem down there in that particular part called the Rupununi was, of course, there were no doctors, no dentists, and that was just the way it was. So people got malaria. Things like measles would come through there, and a lot of the Indians would die of measles and influenza because they had no resistance to it, you see. And so years later, somebody suggested to me, you're 26 days on foot. You see, what we used to do with the cattle, we'd round up these cattle, lassoing them, tying them up, putting them together in a herd, eventually get about 1,000 of them together, and then we would get on our horses, and we would drive the cattle for 9 days. 9 days across the Rupununi savannas. In the heart of the dry season, there were a couple of days there where there was no water. No water for the cowboys, no water for the cattle. And when we got to the edge of the forest, we couldn't take our horses in the forest because horses don't eat leaves, and there isn't any grass in the forest. So we would then go on foot for the rest of the 26, 30 days, trekking the cattle through this narrow pathway that we had cut through the rainforest, just about this wide to the wall there. And there were many rivers that we had to swim the cattle across, like the Essequibo, which is one of the world's major rivers. And eventually we would get all the way to the coastal belt, put them on a steamer, and then they would be taken around the coast to this place, Georgetown. And then we would walk all the way back to where we'd left our horses and get on the horses and ride back to the ranch and do it all over again. This was sort of rather fun. Anyway, we never got to go to town. You see, we had to turn back, us Aborigines had to turn back when we got to the steamer. So we said bye-bye to all the cattle as we put them on the steamer, and we turned around and walked back home. We got back a lot faster than when we went down there. In fact, the Amerindians are very, very strong walkers, and we'd sometimes cover as many as 50 miles in a day. Well, somebody suggested, why don't you learn to fly? Why don't you get yourself an airplane? The next time that you take all these cattle down to Georgetown, why don't you get on the steamer and come on down, and we'll teach you to fly an airplane. And you can swap a dozen or so head of cattle for an airplane. And so this sounded like rather a marvelous idea. And so, of course, knowing that when you've got an airplane, you've got to have some place to land the thing, I set about making an airstrip at the Rupununi. And I figured, 700 or 800 feet long and yay wide, and take down some of the trees and other obstacles, and probably do quite well. So we made what I thought was a satisfactory airstrip, got on the horse, and rode off the 9 days to the forest, and then trekked the rest of the way down to Georgetown, got on the steamer, and showed up at the little airport there, a place called Ogle Airfield, and I'm ready, sir, to learn to fly. And we're sending some cattle down, to buy the airplane. So I started taking lessons, and in this little fabric-covered airplane. And 2 weeks later, a rather misguided a British aviation official gave me a license. And my license, I still have it. It was British Colonial License number 92. So you can figure out just how long ago this was, right? Shortly after the Wright brothers, I suppose. Anyway, so then I put a drum of fuel in the back of the airplane and cranked it up and set off. Well, I'd been down from the Rupununi to Georgetown on horseback and on foot, and I'd been down there on a canoe down the Essequibo River, and but it all looked different when you get up in the sky. And so I picked up the Essequibo River just south of Georgetown there, and flew up the Essequibo River to where the Rupununi River joins the Essequibo, made a right turn in the plain, and kept on going, and came out over the savannah where all these cattle were, and then got down low so that things looked kind of like I was used to seeing them from horseback, except everything was going by so much faster, of course. And I got to this place called Dadanawa, the hill of the spirit macaw, which was the name of our new homestead, the mud hut. And that's where we had the airstrip, you see. And I looked out of the window, and all of the Wapishanas were down there, where they'd been working on the airstrip with their hand tools and whatnot. And I circled and came in for a landing. Well, I had at that point about 31 and a half hours experience and several landings. And I came in for a landing, and it was not one of my best. I came on the brakes a little too rashly, and the airplane somersaulted over on its back in a pile of wreckage. I crawled out from the airplane, and all of the Wapishanas came running over, and they were so excited because, you see, they thought that this was the normal way of landing. Anyway, we righted the airplane up. It was fabric covered, remember? And Dr. Wayne knows all about that because he's an airplane mechanic. He was the guy, you know, started out as whatever it was. And then he was a nurse, and then he was a pilot, and then he was an airplane mechanic, and then he was a doctor at ETSU, and then he was, what do you know, an anesthesiologist, a man of many talents. So he understands this business of, you righted up an airplane, it was covered in fabric, so we sort of straightened out the wings. The propeller had a little bit of a bend in it, and we took it off and we put it on a rock, you know, and we hammered it straight. And of course there was a drum of fuel in the back, which fortunately didn't all run out. And so several days later, I got back in the plane and flew it back to Georgetown for a proper repair. Well, the airplane, after I got the hang of it, really made a big difference, just as it does today with remote area medical. We've got, 9 airplanes, all of them donated. We don't buy airplanes. But airplanes, from the point of view of parachuting out of them in these remote areas or taking umpteen dental chairs and stuff in them, are really a marvelous tool. So now we've got an airplane down there in the Rupununi, and instead of it taking 7 days to ride from one point on the let's call it the ranch. I mean, there was no fences. It was just this vast area of thousands of square miles. And you could ride from one end to the other. It would take about 7 days. In the airplane, I could do it in, 20 minutes. And so started making airstrips all over the place and making much better landings, I might add. And then when somebody would get a little sick or have an accident in one of the remote villages, fly out there with the airplane, pick them up, and bring them back to Dr. Brock. Because remember, we still don't have a doctor, you see. But by now, I've got a couple of medical books. And so there was a gentleman in Georgetown that I started to harass on a regular basis. And then I got a radio. And this gentleman was Major C.J. Betancourt-Gomes, EM, retired. And he was sort of liaison officer with the government. A very nice fellow, very pucker British, And anyway, so I call him up on the radio like once a week. And I had this enormous radio, with all the old tubes and stuff and batteries. And we had a windmill that made some kind of electricity to store it in the batteries. And now and then I'd be able to get through all of the atmospherics and to Major Betancourt-Gomes. And this went on for months and months and months. Major Betancourt-Gomes, we have to get doctors up here to the Rupununi. People are dying. Malaria is rampant. And we had an outbreak of measles. When can we get somebody up here to see the state of affairs here and why we need doctors in the Rupununi? This is the most powerful country in the world. This is the British Empire, for goodness sake, led at the time by Winston Churchill, who said, the sun never sets on the British Empire. And I have not been made the King's chief minister to preside over the dissolution of the British Empire. So they voted him out of office. Anyway, back to the story. So, Major Betancourt-Gomes, we need doctors. When are they coming? On and on and on. Finally, message from the ADC to Major Betancourt-Gomes, we're coming up there next week with Sir Archibald Fenton Sedgwick, who's here from Whitehall. Whitehall is the business part of London, okay? The government. Make sure that the airstrip is in good order, and make sure we're getting there about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Make sure that the tea is ready. And I said, well, Major Betancourt Gomes, please bring the tea. We can certainly provide the hot water. So, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, on a Saturday it was, the government little plane comes in, makes a perfect landing on my nice new airstrip, and Major Betancourt Gomes with the swagger stick gets out, and followed by Sir Archibald Fenton Sedgwick. Very distinguished looking gentleman, wearing a deer stalker, if you know what that is, and the British Army bush jacket with the nice buttons, and leather boots up to here, something to do with snakes. Now, we were all, of course, barefoot cowboys. Yeah. And so I was introduced to Sir Archibald Fenton Sedgwick, and now it's time for tea. So we sat down in the mud hut, and we served tea. And Major Betancourt Gomes said, now, Brock, you said, isn't there a Roman Catholic missionary in this part of the world? And I said, well, as a matter of fact, there is, sir. Father McKinnon. And I see Father McKinnon once or twice a year, perhaps. He, like the rest of us, barefoot, walked between the villages. Some of them were 80 miles apart, and I would see him maybe once or twice a year. Fine old gentleman. I said, yes, Father McKinnon. And so Major Betancourt Gomes said, well, Brock, tomorrow's Sunday. Send out some runners and see if you can find Father McKinnon so that we can have a church service tomorrow about 10 o'clock in the morning. I said, well, I'll send out some runners and see if we can find Father McKinnon. But if we can't find Father McKinnon and we can't have a church service, then what should we do? And Major Betancourt Gomes said, well, then we'll have gin and tonics. Well, I sent out the runners. We couldn't find Father McKinnon. So then they had gin and tonics. And then Major Betancourt Gomes said, now, Brock, I want you to take Sir Archibald out to the nearest Indian village, and so he can evaluate this problem that you keep talking about of the healthcare crisis. So get your best horse for Sir Archibald. I said, well, Major, absolute fine idea. I plan to take Sir Archibald to the nearest Indian village, which is about 10 miles. Maybe not quite 10 miles, 5, 6. But I'd much prefer that we went in the Jesus Christ cart. Our horses are not, not very reliable. Now, the Jesus Christ cart, you see, was an exact replica of what Jesus of Nazareth used to use on the interstate. What we did was we cut down a large rainforest tree, and then we, with our hand saw, we cut 2 big cylinders for the wheels, and then we'd burn a hole in the center of both of them, and we'd stick an axle, another piece of wood in between the two, and now we've got a set of wheels, and then we'd put some runners, boards, rough sawn boards across the top, and then we would hook up 4, sometimes 6 bullocks, steers, trained to the yoke, and we'd yoke them up, and that was the Jesus Christ cart, and that was our transportation, in addition, of course, to foot transportation and horse transportation. And what I liked about the Jesus Christ cart, to digress a little bit here, was that periodically, remember, no doctors in this part of the world, just me with my book. Periodically, I would get a call from one of the villagers that Mrs. Wapishana was having difficulty with her delivery. And this was the most ominous thing that I can remember, because it ain't really described too well in the book. So I would always send the cart for Mrs. So-and-so, you see, and they'd load her up, and they'd bring her back to my residence, my mud hut. But of course there's no roads, you see, so it was this undulating action of the Jesus Christ cart over the rough savannah that invariably, by the time they got there to my place, there was one additional passenger on board, and I didn't have to worry about the book. Anyway, so then this is how I want to transport the safe way to transport what's his name, Sir Archibald Fenton Sedgwick. Major Betancourt Gomes wouldn't hear of it. He said, Brock, absolute nonsense. He said, Sir Archibald is an experienced horseman, 7th Hussars, Indian cavalry, you know. Just go and get your best horse and trot on out to the village. So I said, okay. So I sent a couple of the cowboys, the Indians, to bring our best horse, which was a horse called Rosie. Now, Rosie was a male horse, but you know, we'd done something to Rosie earlier on. And so a couple of my chaps bring up Rosie with the saddle on, the basic cowboy saddle that we used to use, and Sir Archibald prepares to mount. I'm holding on to the front end of a Rosie. And Sir Archibald was a pipe smoker, and he had 2 pipes though, and he was always making a decision which one he was going to use. And so he selected the appropriate pipe, and the other one was in the top pocket of his bush jacket, and he addresses Rosie in true cavalry fashion, and starts to apply weight on the rudimentary stirrup. Now, Rosie, I could tell by the look in Rosie's eye that he was getting a little apprehensive about this, because you see, all of the horses down there were used to the cowboys coming up to them and jumping on and just riding off, and no stirrups or anything like that. In fact, it wasn't until I got to this country that I found out that there's a correct side that you're supposed to get on a horse. We got on the horse whichever side happened to be facing us, right? So Sir Archibald then is applying weight on the stirrup, and Rosie is backing up, and I'm backing up with Rosie, and then Sir Archibald decided he better go for it, and he lifts his other leg up and he gets it hung up on the back of Rosie there, and Rosie backs up and rears up on her hind legs and falls over backwards on top of Sir Archibald. Major Betancourt Gomes over here, my God, Brock, what have you done? And I shout out to the cowboys, who were all Indians, Kadimen Sutana Parangre Kawarawarni, which translated means, get the white man out from underneath the horse. So we pull him out from underneath and get him on his feet and dust him off. And of course, the first thing he looks for is his pipes. And so Archibald said, Brock, he said, I would like to try that again. But do you have another horse without reverse gear? Well, needless to say, nothing much happened subsequent to that about getting doctors down to the Rupununi. And some years later, I can't remember the reason why, I was brought from there up here. And I mean, that was that was a sort of a big change from the jungles of the Amazon to, in fact, Chicago. I remember parking my little airplane in Georgetown and getting on Pan American Airways and flying to New York and then to Chicago. And I was so out of touch with what was going on in the rest of the world that a few weeks later I made a donation of 50 cents to the Black Panthers because I thought it was to help preserve an endangered species. But I had an opportunity after that to start traveling around the United States and other countries as well, and discovered that there were people like the Wapishanas everywhere. And in fact, you can stick a pin blindfold in the map of the United States, and it doesn't matter where you go. There are people there by the thousands. In fact, what is it now? 50.7 million people without health insurance. And it's really a desperate state of affairs. We go to a place like Wise, Virginia, and in 2 days and a couple of hours, that's Friday, Saturday, and 2 or 3 hours on a Sunday morning, and see close to 4,000 people. And those folks up there have come to the realization that remote area medical is their single source of health care for the year. And so they're there by the thousands. And, or we go to a place like Los Angeles and see 1,000 people a day and turn away 2,000 or 3,000 more. Simply can't, I can't treat everybody. Even, and the other great impediment to what we do, and you know, some of you folks, if not all of you folks, actually could do something about it, is that for some extraordinary reason, here in the United States, a doctor, like my good friend Wayne over there, licensed in the state of Tennessee, can't go to Wisconsin or Missouri to provide free care for people that don't have access to care. In other words, medical schools throughout this country have to reach a certain standard before you get a medical license or a nursing license or whatever your field is. Veterinarians are the same. And you're not allowed to cross state lines to provide free care. This is an extraordinary situation. We'll be in a place like Los Angeles with 100 dental chairs, and the best that they can come up with to man those dental chairs on any one day that we're out there is 30 or 40 dentists. It's not that there's a shortage of dentists in California. It's not that there's a shortage of dentists or eye doctors in Missouri or Wisconsin or anywhere else. It's just that on any given day, and it's the same in Tennessee, on any given day, if you're talking about a big operation where you're going to have 1,000 people standing waiting for care who've been there all night, you better have a whole lot of people there to treat them. And so you just don't get enough people, and we've done 656 of these operations, so you know we've had some experience with this. You simply can't get enough people from the local area to meet the need. You've got to be able to bring them in from wherever. And I remember in 2009, I was interviewed by the Los Angeles Times by a gentleman called David Lazarus, who is a correspondent. You know, he's got a column there. And I said, hey, Mr. Lazarus, you know, we've got 100 dental chairs set up there in the Forum Stadium, and we've only got 30 dentists, so, you know, we're turning away thousands of people. You've got to let doctors come to California to provide free care. Well, he puts that in his column, but then he interviewed a lady by the name of Candace Cohen from the California Department of Medicine, a spokesperson, and asked her the same question: why can't doctors come in from outside the state? And Candace Cohen said, and I quote, and it was August the 16th, 2009 now, David Lazarus column, so you can look it up. And she said, we don't want doctors from places like Texas and Alaska. We have very high standards in California. I wonder what she would have thought if she'd been driving at some point in her future through Dallas, the city of Dallas, and had a serious car accident and had to be saved by one of these incompetent Texas doctors that she's talking about. So it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever that doctors are not allowed to cross state lines in this country. So those of you who might be interested in that topic, it's at no cost to the government and no cost to the taxpayer. Well, I was up there about 6 weeks ago in the Hubert Humphrey building right opposite the Capitol there, across the street, with Health and Human Services people. And I went up there at their suggestion to talk about remote area medical responding to emergencies like Katrina and these terrible tornadoes that we've had in different states, like down in Tuscaloosa. Why cannot you, the government, allow us, with the resources that we have, all these airplanes, all these trucks, all these volunteers, that when you get something like Katrina, that we can jump in the airplanes and jump in the trucks and go, and provide care free of charge? And their answer to that was, we can't be sure that these doctors are really doctors. This is high-level people now at Health and Human Services. We can't be sure that these doctors really are doctors and that they haven't lost their license in one state and gone to another state and got another license. And we want to be absolutely sure that they're not pedophiles. I said, well, ladies and gentlemen of the Health and Human Services hierarchy, we've treated 500,000 patients. We've had 68,000 plus volunteers. I cannot think of an incompetent doctor that we've had. We've never had a lawsuit, and we sure as hell haven't had any child molesters. So how many more thousands and thousands of patients do we have to treat to prove that the system works? Well, then it gets to another issue. They say, well, you know, it's states' rights, and it's, what's that other darn thing they're talking about? Interstate commerce. You know? So it's a rip. Now, the good news is that Tennessee passed a law in 1995. So you folks from Tennessee led the country in passing legislation in Nashville that allows doctors to come into Tennessee from anywhere in the country as long as they have a valid license. And we check to make sure that their license is good and that there isn't anything naughty about their background that would preclude them working with us. And about an average of about 53%, and sometimes as high as 60 and 70% of all the practitioners that we have, and Tammy knows that, at these clinics are from somewhere else. We got doctors that come regularly from New York, all the way from Buffalo, to help treat patients, and other parts, even California. They buy their own tickets, and they buy their own hotel rooms, and it's just marvelous what they do. And the volunteer doctors from Tennessee, they want to go somewhere else too to provide the same care, free care at their expense. So Tennessee led the way in 1995. Last year, Illinois took the Tennessee law and passed the legislation in Illinois. And we were in Chicago this last August and saw a bunch of people, and many of the doctors that came to Chicago were from other parts of the country. California also passed the same law under great opposition And when they passed it, they shot it in the foot and said, to implement the law, it's going to be in the hands of the Board of Medicine, the Board of Dentistry, the Board of Optometry, the Board of Nursing. And guess what? As of yesterday, I'm hearing they're talking about fingerprints. Before, Tammy, you could go to California, you're going to have your fingerprints taken and send in a fee and fill out a lot of other damn nonsense, even if they allow that. So, anyway, so that's my sort of favourite beef about the healthcare in this country. I'm not allowed to vote, I'm not an American, I'm proud to be in this country and absolutely love it, it's my home. So I don't get involved in the politics and party politics or anything. But this just seems to make sense. As far as our overseas program is concerned, we're really looking for more help in Haiti. We're designing what we call the Ram Ranger program. The Ram Ranger program for Haiti is taking groups of 50 to 100 Haitian youth, 16 to 19 years of age, putting them in a tented camp with us and teaching them stuff that they know to help in their own communities, whether it's agriculture, whether it's fixing the lousy roads in their neighborhood, or whether it's building environmentally safe outhouses, latrines, or whether it's planting trees, or whether it's basic learning about basic medical work. That's the Ram Ranger program. We want to also create the Ram Ranger program for youth here in the United States, particularly aimed at Native American kids. We were at Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, South Dakota, several weeks ago, and the situation there is not just unique to that particular reservation. Their unemployment is 85%, and the suicide rate amongst children there is 150% of the national average. In one 19-day period in Pine Ridge, 17 kids committed suicide. 17 kids in 19 days. Why? Because they feel totally helpless, no future. And then they get into drugs and they get into alcohol. So we're trying to persuade the elders of the tribe there at Pine Ridge, and it will be extended to other communities, that next summer we'd like to bring 30 or 40 of those kids down to Tennessee. We've got a 1,000-acre beautiful cattle and horse ranch down there near Knoxville, where we're going to keep them, and we're going to teach them stuff, and some of the traditional stuff that they don't have a chance to do anymore with horses and with cattle, because this is a 1,000-acre quarter horse ranch with cattle, and we'll have canoes out there on the river, but we'll also teach them other stuff, and then take them back to the reservation and bring in another bunch of kids. So that's the Ram Ranger program. I've talked long enough. Gosh, it's 8 o'clock. Time for my bedtime. But does anybody have any questions? Because I think Randy, you said I had to answer questions.
It's actually in the contract.
You said that we might be able to do something. What is that?
Oh, in terms of doctors crossing state lines? Yeah.
Whatever your needs are.
Well, doctors crossing state lines, a big issue. It's starting to get a little bit of traction now after all these years of me harping on the subject. But do you know, I think we've only had 4 members of Congress come to a remote area medical clinic. One came to Nashville, and we had one that came to see us in Los Angeles, and another one up in Sacramento. So it's a real experience when these members of Congress, of which there's only been 4 in 650 plus missions, to see the huge numbers of people and listen to these people about how desperate they are. and how much it would help the situation if doctors were A, allowed to cross state lines, and B, were protected from malpractice, frivolous malpractice suits. Every doctor that calls up for the first time to volunteer says, is my license good where you're going? Well, if you're coming to Tennessee, yes. You're going anywhere else? No. Am I protected against malpractice? You come to Tennessee, yes. You're going anywhere else? No. Well, it's easier for me to go to Guatemala. We need those people to they want to do it in their own country, but they're afraid of the liability issue and the fact that their license isn't good. So, you know, talking to people in Congress, that's the way you can help. Thank you.
Can you give some sort of general breakdown of the kinds of problems you see in one of your clinics?
Yeah, very good question. Get asked that a lot. The media attend our clinics quite frequently because they're interested in this issue of the healthcare reform. And a group from the BBC were at our clinic a few weeks ago with us in Henderson, Tennessee. And they asked the same question. I said, okay, it was like 5:30 in the morning. We were just getting ready to open the door and bring people in. And there were about, I think we'd given out 600 numbers during the course of the night. So they were right outside the door there, and we get ready to open the door, typically at a school, where we set up dental, vision, and general medical, and sometimes animals too. And they asked the same question. Well, what are these people here for? I said, okay, let's ask them. So opened the door and said, morning, folks. Very glad to have you here. This is not a government operation, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to do the best we can for you. Who's here to see the dentist? Every hand goes up. Okay, thank you very much. Who's here to see the eye doctor and hope that we can make you a pair of eyeglasses? Every hand goes up. Who's here to see a medical doctor? Because we've got women's health, we're doing pap smears, sometimes we're doing mammograms, and podiatry and all of that stuff. Who's here to see the medical doctor? Well, there were 600 and something people out there, and I think 3 hands went up. Well, the truth of the matter is, they all needed to see the medical doctor, because we identified people in abundance that didn't know they had diabetes in the process of triaging, and people that have sky-high blood pressure, 200 over whatever, sometimes so high that we have to put them in an ambulance and take them off to hospital before they stroke out right there on the premises. So they all need to see the medical doctor, but they are totally preoccupied with the pain in their rotten teeth. They haven't been to a dentist in years and years and years, if ever. Or they can't see to function and they need a pair of glasses. So it's the same people that are there to see, to get their glasses, and they're there to get their teeth fixed. And so that's the way it breaks down. Sometimes as high as 85% are there to get their teeth done. And the profile of the patients is 29 to 64. Because up until about the age of 18, kids in this country can get the care they need through the various state and federal programs. But when they're kicked out on the street, unless their parents have adequate insurance, they're not able to take care of the onset of some of these problems. And by the time they get to the age of 29, they're starting to have big problems with their teeth. And as they get a little bit older than that, they're starting to have problems needing eyeglasses, etc. And of course, after 64, then they're on Medicare. So 85% of the population at our clinics are in that age group, 29 to 64. It used to be 6.6% kids that we saw. Now it's dropped, which is good, to around 2% kids. But in the Indian reservation, and when we were in Pine Ridge the other day, the percentage of kids that came was 44.4%, about what we would expect to see in Guatemala or Haiti. Yes, sir.
What is the process that you go about that where you pick your locations? How do you pick your locations that you have a RAM clinic?
Sorry, my hearing is very bad. How do we pick the locations? Only by invitation. We don't go anywhere, well, with the exception of Katrina, of course, you know, big emergency, we go. But we only go where we're invited. So we get an invitation to go to Rio County or Henderson or Los Angeles. We're currently planning to be in Sacramento and Oakland, California, because we were invited to be there. So the public determined that for us, and we're booked way into the future. There's somebody at the very back there, if I can hear you.
When you go to these communities, how do you get the word out to the populace that you're going to be there?
How do we get the word out to the populace? That is the responsibility of the people, the host community. So like we're going to Oakland, California in March, and they are already starting to get the word out. The California group that invited us, they are starting to get the word out that we're going to be at the Oakland Coliseum, I think it is, on such and such a date in March. And so it's their responsibility. We've never, in 656 operations, we've never gone to a place and there was nobody there. The one thing you can be absolutely sure of, the patients are there, and we hope that the doctors are there to treat them.
What are the commitments by the host community?
The commitments of the host community are finding a place to hold it, and it's got to be free. Except in California, we haven't figured out getting it done free in California, but we're working on it. In other words, the host community goes to a high school or an elementary school or a sports stadium and says, we want to bring remote area medical here, and they're going to be here for 3-4 days or a week, and can we use your place? So hopefully the place, in most cases, 90-odd%, it's free, the location. And then we ask the host community if they can find rooms for some of the volunteers, like Tommy over there, who goes on virtually every one of them. You know, we don't want him to have to pay his hotel room. And so they do, it's their responsibility to come up with 15 or 20 rooms for the regular folks that are going to be that go to all. Also the food, that we've got to feed the volunteers. So somebody shows up, whether it's the local church or civic group, you know, with the egg muffins or whatever you call them, and lunch and dinner, and everybody sort of grabs the food while they're working. And we try and feed the patients. And in most cases, we are able to feed the patients through, again, local sources.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of your patients are, I guess, claimed to be the have-nots. Are you seeing a change in the, I guess, the class of the patients who you're going to see? Are you seeing more middle-class individuals who just come out with insurance? Or?
Yeah. The numbers have been very level. So, you know, this situation has just gone on for years and years, decades and decades. You can trace it all the way back to Theodore Roosevelt, who said, you know, we ought to try and do something about the healthcare problem in this country. So, and we've got a history of places like, in February, we're going to be at the, near the zoo there, the Jacobs building, right? Every year, the numbers are about the same, literally within a dozen. It's around about 1,000 or 994, something like that, every time we go there. So it's essentially the same people. They are the unemployed, they are the people with jobs, they are the uninsured, and they are people with insurance. Now, we don't do a survey of, or we don't ask any questions, you see. The only question we're interested in is where does it hurt? And we'll see if we can fix it. So we don't sort of say, have you got insurance? And, you know, that scares people off. So we don't ask those questions. But we do know, because they volunteer the information, often that many of them do have insurance. But it probably does not cover dental. And it probably does not cover vision and eyeglasses. And I don't know of anything in the new legislation that's going to cover dental and eyeglasses either. And if it doesn't, then we're still going to see these thousands of people who can't afford to go to the dentist. Every emergency room in Knoxville, there's a sign up there, if you're here because you've got a bad tooth, call this number, 579-1530, which is my number. Okay? Because the emergency room doesn't do teeth, and they don't do eyeglasses. And so that's the profile. I can stay here as long as you like. I just don't want to be offensive here. And who? Again, because of my hearing, what was it?
The question was, she's worked with an NGO before that had a regular service to the uninsured.
Yeah.
And she was asking whether RAM has any consistency in a community, or is it just that short period of time that you're there?
Well, we've gone to a lot of places time and time again. We go to Wise County, Virginia, the same time every year for the last 12 years. And there are many places like that. So we do try and keep returning to these places, but we are spread very thin, unfortunately, and that's understandable. So it might be a year before we come back. And we really don't have an answer to that, other than we hope that a lot of other people, if they'll change the law and allow doctors to cross state lines, we hope that a lot of other civic groups and churches will set up similar programs.
Yes, the funding, is it all contributions, or is there any federal, state money for your
The funding. Where's the collection plate? It's a subject I always forget to talk about. We are a 501c3 organization, and so contributions to remote area medical are tax deductible. And what keeps this thing going is those $5 and $10 contributions from the public by check or through our website, because we do not accept cash. And so that's what keeps it going. And we were very fortunate back in 2008 when 60 Minutes did a profile on remote area medical. And it made a rather dramatic difference in our intake of contributions. Because up until that point, we were really running the well, I remember a week before that, one of our volunteers wanted to buy a widget, and I think it was in the $5 range, and I had to find out from bookkeeping if we had $5 to buy this whatever widget it was. So, but we're really sort of recession-proof because I shouldn't say we don't have a payroll, because we have two organizations. We have the Remote Area Medical Volunteer Corps, which I started 27 years ago. And all of us, and all of these folks here that I introduced earlier, we're all volunteers. We don't get paid. Then we have another organization, which is the Remote Area Medical Foundation, which we launched about a dozen years ago, which is also a 501c3, and that is the sort of administrative arm of Remote Area Medical. And we've got, 5 or 6 minimally paid staff in Knoxville who work for the Remote Area Medical Foundation. And so, in other words, the 68,000 volunteers we're talking about are all volunteers like us who don't get paid. And so we can run this organization, in other words, really with nothing. We started out with one pickup truck that belonged to Master Sergeant Robinson, who was 40 years in various branches of the U.S. military. And he had a camouflaged, awful-looking vehicle. And he loaned it and put in the gas, and we had a couple of 400-pound dental chairs that we used to pick up and put in the back of that thing and drive up to Hancock County and places like that with a couple of dentists. And then it sort of built its way up from there. And back in those days, there was no money whatsoever, but whoever was going put gas in the vehicle, and the dentists brought their own stuff and supplies, and so did the doctor, but it worked. I hope we don't have to go back to that, but if we have to, we will.
Do you ever worry that the powers that be in this country that don't necessarily want to move forward with meaningful healthcare reform to address the real problem of the 50 million uninsured might see the marvelous work that you're doing as the model for trying to meet the healthcare needs? As many people as you are able to help, it's only a drop in the bucket as far as what the real need is.
A little bit of relay, please.
I think the question was, some people might look at the work that RAM does and say, that's good enough, we don't actually have to meet the needs of 50.7 million Americans who are uninsured. Do you ever worry about that?
Well, you know, people, particularly bureaucrats, have made the statement that what we do is just a Band-Aid operation. And I suppose in many ways it is. But for somebody that comes in with a whole mouthful of rotten teeth, it's really a life-changing experience for that person when we can take care of it for them. I don't worry about the issue of it being a Band-Aid operation, but unless they're going to do something about the dental needs of the public. And tomorrow, at 1 o'clock actually, I'm in some kind of a chat room on PBS with the president of the American Dental Association. And one of the subjects that I know is going to come up, that the American Dental Association are very much against, and I have to be very careful about taking any sides in that issue, is what they call mid-level providers. Up in Alaska, they have a program where there's a 2-year course. You come out of high school if you're going to be a mid-level provider, and they teach you how to extract teeth and how to fill teeth. There are several states here in the lower 49 that really are interested in implementing a similar program to the one in Alaska. Well, is it better to have a mid-level provider in a place where there's no dentist, as there are in many rural areas of this country? Or should we be doing something about making sure that there is a real dentist in that part of the country? It's a very difficult problem. I would say, though, that the mid-level provider concept in a place like where I used to live, on the Brazil border, we now have mid-level providers there who are Amerindian natives who've been trained how to extract teeth and how to fill teeth. A very, very successful program, because unless we take a dentist down there, there ain't one. And you've got thousands and thousands of people spread over thousands of square miles with no dentist in sight ever. But it's a very difficult problem. I got a letter from, I didn't even know that I had a cousin, but I got a letter from my cousin just a couple of days ago from Britain. He'd seen something on Google or something about, his long-lost cousin. And he rambled on for a couple of pages of neatly typed letter to me about how terrible the healthcare system is in Britain. So that doesn't seem to be the solution either. He was saying how long you have to wait for dental treatment, and if you can't afford that length of a wait, well, it's going to cost you a lot of money to go to a dentist and outside of the national health system. And in fact, I've had letters from the editor of the national newspaper in Wales, who saw something at 60 Minutes, I think, and said, if you brought remote area medical to Wales, to Cardiff, which is where he was, there would be a queue around the block to see the RAM dentist. So the single payer system, as it's called, I believe, is not working too well either. So here you have the best healthcare in the world right here in the United States, if you can darn well afford it. And if you can't afford it, well, then you're coming to people like us. It's a very sad situation, and it doesn't seem to have a solution.
Well, on that note, Stan, let's give Mr. Baraka.
And thank you very much. You've been most kind. And if there are other individuals who have questions, I'll be glad to stay here and answer them. Thank you.
Stan, you've received a lot of honors in your life. None quite like the honor of humanitarian scholar in the College of Public Health. Thank you for that. And we have some gifts for you as well. And just before you go, I think most of you know ETSU is associated with one of the RAM events in Bristol, Virginia, Tennessee, which will be April 13th, 14th, and 15th, 2012. Look forward to seeing you. Both non-clinical and clinical volunteers. Thanks, and we'll send out an email about the next Leading Voices lecture. Thanks for coming tonight.